Today, I'm going to be setting myself a challenge. I'm taking things back to basics and I'm giving you some very practical tips on how you can instantly start taking better photos using your phone. So let me outline the rules for today's challenge. I'm only going to be using my phone to take photos. I have an iPhone 14 Pro Max and I can hear you probably already thinking that this has a fantastic camera system. It absolutely does. But I know that a lot of you only have a camera with one lens and can only shoot in JPEG image format. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing with my iPhone 14 Pro Max today. I'm going to be opening up the standard camera app on my phone and just starting to take photos. So that covers the camera for today. In terms of getting access to cars to shoot with, I'm going to be walking into car dealerships and taking photos, and I'm going to be taking you along with me so you can see exactly what my thought process is when I'm taking photos. And then the third part of this video is an editing tutorial all about how I can take those JPEGs that I shoot on my phone and really just bring them up in the quality. I'm only allowing myself to use free versions of editing software, and I'm really just gonna push that as far as I can. So with all that being said, let's get out there, start taking some photos and just having some fun. So here we are at Dutton Garage. It's a really famous supercar dealership here in Melbourne, Australia, based in Richmond. So if you are in the Melbourne area or you want to check it out, definitely just punch Dutton Garage into Google and see what you can see. Got my phone out and got it ready to go, and you can see there's this beautiful Porsche lined up. And you can see first thing, I get my phone out of my pocket and I give the lens a wipe. That's something that is so often overlooked, and that's the biggest first tip that I have for you, is when you're getting started shooting photos on your phone, take it out of your pocket and give the lens a clean. And right here you can see I'm going to start at the front of the car and I'm going to work my way around. I'm starting off just with a basic front shot, and I've crouched down to get nice and low. A tip that I have is to get in line with the height of the headlights, and then you can really accentuate the proportions of the car. Next shot that I'm taking here, I'm using the bench top and I'm using the leaves of the plants to frame up the car and really create some interest in this image. And that's something that I always recommend. Look at trying to get foreground elements into the image to create a lot of interest and to frame up the subject, which is in this case the car. And then what you can see now is I'm really just walking around the car, getting a sense for the space, having a think about some angles. And the next thing for you guys to think about is really just to take your time. So you can see I've kind of perched myself in the corner here. I'm using the Ferrari and then this painting to frame up the subject of the car again. And I always like to start with wider shots when I'm taking photos, and then as I'm progressing and as once I've done a full circle around the car taking wider shots, then I'll start to go a bit closer in. These doors look really cool. And I was like, hey, let's frame up the front wheel of the car and get a cool kind of detail shot on my way around. I'm now going to get a rear 3/4 shot, which is another one of those kind of basic shots that you always start off getting when you're shooting a car. So front shot, front 3/4, rear 3/4, side profile, back shot. These are all kind of those mandatory, more basic shots that you can get. Another thing that I want you guys to think about is, I'm hugely inspired by the work of other photographers. So I highly recommend you looking into other photographers' work and just seeing what they're doing and getting inspired. Right here, you can see I'm holding the phone nice and high above my head, and I'm actually getting high up above the car. That's another thing. So get low down to the ground. You can see that I'm doing that now, but also get high up above the car. Oftentimes when you take a photo of a car in a dealership or at a car event, you just walk up and you're taking it from kind of chest height. But just remember that everyone takes photos from chest height. So if you want your shots to immediately look more professional, try and think of angles that are unique. Right here, you can see I'm using the wheel of this old Ford, I believe it is, to kind of frame up and get a bit of a shot of the car. And here I'm getting some interior shots. So don't forget about getting shots of the interior. So sometimes I actually find myself just getting distracted by taking photos of the exterior of the car and forgetting about the interior, but don't forget, play around with using the window frame to frame up the steering wheel and create a bit of interest in the shot as well. Here I'm focusing on the wheels. I'm getting some detail shots of the wheels. Right here, I'm going to actually take a shot of that front wheel, but using two other cars to frame up. Also now focusing on the rear of the car, getting a shot of that rear wheel. and that spoiler. Here, once again, I'm using the two cars to frame up a kind of side profile slash, rear 3/4 shot of our subject. To reiterate, at the start of this video, it's all about using the camera app as it opens on your phone. So I'm using the standard lens and I'm using just JPEGs. But for you, if you've got telephoto, highly recommend shooting telephoto because that really actually gives you great proportions when it comes to the car. This is a little bit wide for car photography, but if this is all you have, definitely work with it and get out and shoot photos. But if you do have a telephoto option, highly recommend just punching in because it'll give you really cool proportions. Here I'm just very awkwardly asking these two gentlemen if I can step in next to them and get a back shot. Don't be afraid to walk up and ask people. Ask very nicely for them to give you a little bit of space so you can take your photos. Once again, getting up high so that I can get a kind of look down shot on the rear of the car. Here we go, getting a detailed shot of the rear of the car, the tail light and the spoiler. So you can see I've done pretty much a full 360 around the whole car, and now I'm gonna start to push myself and think of some other unique angles. So right here, I'm using this doorway to actually frame up the car.
Thanks, man.
So that was all the shots that I managed to get for this shoot. So now let's have a little bit of a recap over everything we just went over. Okay, so there you have it. That is a little bit of an insight into how I approach taking photos. Regardless of whether you're using your phone, a dedicated mirrorless camera or DSLR, that process is the same. My thought process that I go through when I'm out there shooting photos of cars is the same regardless of the setup that I'm using. So now that we've covered all of that, it's time to jump into the editing software that I'm going to be using today, which is the free version of Lightroom, so Lightroom Mobile, and really show you how to use that app to get the most out of your photos. What we're going to do is, if you haven't already, download an app called Lightroom Mobile. It's by Adobe and it's an incredibly powerful piece of editing software that I highly recommend. It does have a premium version, but it can be something that you upgrade to eventually. Lightroom is the industry standard when it comes to photo editing software. But for right now, this video is all about getting back to basics and starting off just with free software, cameras that you already have, all of that sort of stuff. So what you can see on the screen now is I'm actually in the library of the Lightroom app. So you've got to go through, create a bit of an account. If you need help learning to set up Lightroom Mobile, punch that into Google and do a little bit of research. In the interest of time, for today's video, I want to just take you through how I go about editing my photos using the free version of Lightroom. So I've already imported all of the photos. To do that, you hit the little picture button with the plus in the bottom right-hand corner there, and then you can go add from camera roll or whatever you'd prefer to do so. Select all the photos that you want to use and then go from there. I've created an album, so let's go into that album. It's the Dutton 911 Turbo, the photos that we just took. And you can see I've got 21 images. So I'm gonna go through and edit just to give you an idea of my workflow when it comes to using Lightroom Mobile. Let's jump in. I really like this second shot that we got where I used the bench as a bit of a frame in the foreground, but also the plants as well. So what I'm gonna start with, you can see we've got all of our tools down in the bottom that we're gonna use. And what I like to start with always is cropping the image first. So that's what we're gonna do. So you come down, you tap on the crop button, and then I'm just gonna drag the bottom right-hand corner in this case, and I'm just gonna center up the car in the frame. It won't need much. And that's always something I like to start with doing, is making sure the car is nicely centered in the frame. So hit the tick button in the bottom right-hand corner there to confirm. Then we're gonna go over and we're gonna go to light. So when you tap on light, you'll be greeted with all of these different options: exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So we're gonna start off just playing around with these a little bit. So in terms of exposure, obviously using the phone, the exposure is pretty good right out of the gate, but I am just gonna bump that up very slightly just to assist with making the car a little bit more visible. From there, let's play around with the highlights slider. Because this is a JPEG, you won't be able to recover very much information from the highlights. So honestly, let's just keep that at 0 for now. And then I'm actually gonna come down to shadows and I'm just gonna bump that up ever so slightly, just to bring out a few of the details that are in the bodywork of the car. So that looks good to me. Just lighten up the image ever so slightly. Whites and blacks, I think we're gonna leave that alone. If I just reduce the blacks, no, we're just gonna leave that alone. And then we're gonna come to something called curve. So I've scrolled back up to the top of the light panel and you can see curve. So we tap on that and what we're greeted with is all of these 5 different options on curves that we can manipulate. What I want to do though from the start is to just come over and all the way on the left, tap that little circle. So we have that selected. And then we're gonna add just a really simple S-curve to the image, okay? So I'm gonna tap in the middle, I'm gonna tap in the bottom, and then I'm gonna tap at the top. So that way I get these, 3 editable points in the middle there on top of the 2 points that are already existing. So then I'm gonna come in and you can see this bottom one, when I click and drag, that actually manipulates the shadows of the image. It makes them darker. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna pull the shadows down ever so slightly, just quite subtle. Again, we're working with JPEG files, so we don't want to push it too far. And then with highlights, I'm just going to pop those ever so slightly as well. An S-curve is something that I always like to implement in all of my photos that I edit. I'm also going to raise up the blacks very slightly. So you can see if we raise it up high, you can see what it does. It crushes all the blacks. And I like to just add a little bit of that to my photos, just very, very slightly. With my photo editing style, it's very much like a little goes a long way. So then we're gonna click done, and that's all we're gonna do for curves. And now that we've adjusted the curves, I actually wanna increase the shadows a little bit more. So let's come down to the shadows and just pump those up a little bit more just to make the car visible. Okay, so that's good for the light panel. So you can see when you press and hold on the image with your finger, you can get a before and an after. So there's before, there's after. We've just sharpened it up ever so slightly, but we're just getting started here. So now we come into color. You can see white balance wise, we can go auto, we can go as shot. Honestly, the auto setting for me in this space, it makes a little bit too blue. So what I'm honestly gonna do is I'm gonna trust the phone that it knows the correct white balance setting, and I'm just gonna go as shot and just keep that as it is. Something I always like to do with all my photos as well is actually increase the vibrance. So we're gonna come up and increase the vibrance maybe to about 15. Usually I don't like to go any higher than 20 when I'm increasing the vibrance, so we'll stop at 15 for this. Then we go into mix. Tap on mix, and what we're greeted with is all of these different sliders. So these are the HSL or the hue, saturation and luminance sliders for each of the different colors in the image. So what I like to do is I like to just start playing around and seeing what happens. So let's play around with the hues of the reds. You can see that's not doing a great deal because there's not a whole lot of reds in the image. So let me just leave that as it is. Let's come to the orange, play around with the hues. Now, something that I always notice when I shoot my photos at Dutton Garage is it gets very yellow because of the wooden floors. So what I might do is just add a little bit of orange into that floor, push the yellows a little bit to the orange and maybe reduce the saturation ever so slightly. Then we're gonna come to the yellow panel, and then again, I'm just gonna push the yellows and make them just a little bit more orange, just to make it a little bit more pleasing, not as yellowy looking. Greens, I tend to like to push the greens all the way to the yellow end, just so that they're not really detracting from the image. So we're gonna push the greens almost all the way. So what's that? That's a minus 83 on the greens. Then we're gonna come to the blues, or the teal HSL slider. And with this slider, I like to push it pretty much all the way to this really nice vibrant teal color. It tends to be the glass of the car that goes a little bit more blue, which I like. But you can see if we do the same to the blues, that's kind of looking a little bit strange in this shot. I might just do a little bit just to take it off that really kind of brilliant blue color. Purples, what do we got? Not much is happening with the purples. And then the pinks, let's play around. Again, not much is happening with that. So we're gonna leave that as it is. So we've got the slight color grade on there, and then there's the before and there's the after so far. Very subtle difference, but you can see we're just starting to sharpen it up. Next one, we're in the effects panel, and this is gonna make a little bit more of a difference to our image. I'm gonna play around with the texture and the clarity. I always like to increase those, but I never tend to take it above a 15 for texture and a 15 for clarity. But you can see what that does is it just adds a little bit more interest to the image. So you can see we're making some changes there. And then the big one is adding a vignette. So usually I would actually add a vignette to my image or add that sort of style by using masking. But because we're using the free version of Lightroom Mobile, we can't use masking without paying for a subscription. So I'm gonna use the next best thing, which is vignette. So again, a little goes a long way. So we're just gonna drag down the vignette. And what we're trying to do here is really pull the focus onto the car. The car is the subject of the image, and we want to make sure that the viewer's eye is just drawn into the car when they look at our image. So I'm going to bring that vignette down like so, and then I'm actually going to adjust the midpoint. So you can do a whole heap of stuff when it comes to the vignette. I'm going to change a bit of the vignette's midpoint, and you can see what that's doing is it's just tightening it up around the car. So really drawing that focus in. I'm just going to increase that vignette a little more. And then from here, I'm actually going to go back to our light tab because I want to now introduce a little bit more of an increase in the shadows. And you can see when you edit a photo, it's this iterative process where you go back and forth and you make changes and back and forth. So I'm bumping up the shadows a little bit more just because I want to retain some of the detail that's in the car. So that's looking good, 46 there. And we're going to come back to the effects and we're going to go a bit more of a vignette. Done. Detail, sharpening, noise reduction, we don't really need that. These are good lighting conditions, we don't need to play around. And then optics, I'm going to enable lens corrections. That's a feature that will basically remove the warp that happens from lenses. It even happens with smartphone cameras. So that's going to remove the warp. And you can see, just with a few basic tweaks, you can see we've transformed that image. So there's the before, looking pretty flat, looking pretty soulless. And then there's the after. You can see we've just sharpened up all the colors, made it a little bit more interesting, but also really focused on pulling focus towards the car there. So I'm super happy with that one. Now, let's come over to, I really like this shot. So once again, it's a bit of a wider shot. It captures more of the details of the space that we're in whilst also showing off the car, which I really like. But you can see, first port of call, is I'm actually going to crop in a little bit. I'm feeling like there's a little bit too much real estate around the car. And something I always like to use is the rule of thirds. So I want the subject of the image to occupy 2/3 of the image, and then 1/3 of the image is left to kind of the surrounding area. So I'm actually going to drag this up and just position the car on the kind of that grid line, that kind of second grid line there. So that way I know that we're taking up the bottom 2/3 of the image with the subject, and then the upper third is really just for a little bit more context as to where the car is. So we're going to tick that. You can see it really just transforms the shot when you spend a little bit of time using Lightroom. Even Lightroom Mobile, the free version, can just do so much for you when it comes to sharpening up your car photos that you take on your phone. So there you have it. There are some really practical tips and tricks that you can use to instantly improve the photos that you're taking on your phone, but also learning how to edit those photos in a piece of software that's incredibly powerful. And this really is just the starting point. Keep putting those reps in, keep getting that practice in, get out there and shoot as much as you possibly can, practice as much as you can, and just really enjoy your photography journey. And when you do want to start taking your photography to the next level, I offer a preset pack and editing tutorial that's linked in the description box below. That goes into my whole professional process when it comes to editing photos and also giving you all of the presets that I use on a daily basis. Also, links to all the gear that I use is down in the description as well if you wanted to check it out. And if you did enjoy today's video and you did learn something, please hit that like button, subscribe, and also hit that notification bell so you don't miss any videos that I upload. But with all that said and done, that's it for today's video. I just want to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.